It's a cold morning in 1902, on the rugged, unforgiving shore of Lake Superior. 5 men stand on a desolate stretch of land in Two Harbors, Minnesota, their breath forming mist in the biting air as they stare down a huge, silent pile of dark, jagged rock. They are not industrialists, not yet. They are a doctor named J. Danley Budd, a lawyer named John Dwan, 2 railroad executives named William McGonigal and Henry Bryan, and the manager of a meat market named Herman Cable. They have poured every cent of their life savings, roughly $5,000, a small fortune at the turn of the century, into a venture they believe will make them kings of the American Industrial Revolution. Their plan is deceptively simple. Mine corundum, the second hardest mineral on Earth, and sell it to the booming abrasives industry for sandpaper and grinding wheels. In an era when America is building skyscrapers and steamships, the demand for abrasives is insatiable. But when the first shipments finally arrive at the processing plants in Chicago, the reports that come back aren't just disappointing, they're devastating. The rock isn't corundum. It's anorthosite, a virtually useless mineral too soft to scratch a piece of pine. The 5 founders are standing on a mountain of failure. They are broke before they've even begun. Most companies would have folded right there, buried under the weight of 1,000 tons of worthless stone and the laughter of their peers. But what happened next isn't just a story of survival. It's the definitive blueprint for how a failed mining company accidentally reshaped the modern world. You're watching the chronicle of the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company, a company that spent 70 years trying to make things stick, only to become a global empire because of a glue that refused to stick at all. This is the improbable, high-stakes story of 3M. In the early 20th century, the American Midwest was a place of brutal winters and even more brutal business cycles. The failure in Two Harbors should have been the end of the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company. The corundum they'd promised their investors was a lie told by geology, a cruel trick played by the ancient rocks of the Iron Range. They had no customers, no usable product, and a growing pile of debt threatening to swallow their homes and reputations. The company's stock was essentially worthless. Legend has it shares were traded for a few drinks at the local tavern. But in 1905, a St. Paul businessman named Lucius Ordway saw something in these men's grit that the mineral reports didn't show. Ordway was a man of immense wealth and even greater patience. He began pouring money into the sinking ship, eventually moving operations to Duluth in a last-ditch attempt to salvage what remained. It was a desperate 11th-hour pivot. If they couldn't mine abrasives from their own land, they would buy them from elsewhere and manufacture the sandpaper themselves. But even that transition was a comedy of errors. At their new plant in Duluth, the weight of the raw materials they'd purchased, the real corundum they'd had to buy at premium prices, was so immense that it compromised the structural integrity of the building. One afternoon, the second floor literally collapsed, sending tons of equipment, minerals, and half-finished sandpaper crashing into the basement in a cloud of dust and splintered wood. It was rock bottom, both literally and figuratively. During the first decade of its existence, 3M didn't generate a single cent of profit. They were the failed company of the North Shore, a running joke in the local business community. They were so poor they couldn't pay their employees in cash, often issuing company script that was barely accepted at the local general store. Then came 1907, and with it, a young, unassuming bookkeeper named William McKnight. He was a man of quiet, surgical precision, a man who looked at a balance sheet and saw not just numbers, but a narrative of inefficiency and missed opportunity. McKnight was the first to realize that 3M's problem wasn't just the minerals, it was a total lack of standardization. At the time, sandpaper was a crude, unpredictable tool. One batch would be too coarse, ruining the wood. The next would be too fine, failing the job entirely. McKnight became obsessed with quality control, a concept that was revolutionary for a small, struggling manufacturing company. He personally inspected the grit, the glue, and the backing paper. He spent hours on the factory floor, talking to workers and understanding the friction in the process. In 1914, under his relentless influence, 3M finally produced its first proprietary hit, 3Mite abrasive cloth. It was a tough, flexible material that could withstand the intense heat of industrial grinding without falling apart. 2 years later, in 1916, for the first time in 14 years of constant struggle, the company paid a dividend to its shareholders. The failed mining company had survived its infancy, but the real transformation was about to happen in a place no one expected, the damp, chaotic paint shops of the booming automobile industry. By the mid-1920s, the world was changing at a dizzying pace. Henry Ford had put America on wheels, and two-tone paint jobs, a dark body with a lighter roof or fenders, were the height of fashion. But for shop workers, it was a logistical nightmare. To paint a car in two colors, they had to mask off a section using surgical tape, heavy glue, and old newspapers. It was a messy, unreliable process. When they peeled the tape off, the adhesive was often so strong it ruined the fresh, expensive paint underneath, or so weak it let the new paint bleed through, leaving a ragged, unprofessional line. In 1923, a 3M lab assistant named Richard Drew was visiting a local body shop to test a new batch of sandpaper. He was a college dropout with a banjo and a curious mind, not a trained chemist. While he was there, he heard a painter erupt in a spectacular string of curses as a strip of tape tore a huge chunk out of the finish of a customer's Packard. Drew, moved by the man's frustration, promised him on the spot that he'd find a solution. Back at the 3M lab, Drew began experimenting with cabinet maker's glue, glycerin, and crepe paper. For 2 long years, he failed. His experiments were a mess. The tape either stuck too hard or didn't stick at all. His bosses, focused on the profitable sandpaper business, told him to stop wasting time and get back to his real job. But McKnight, who now led the company with an eye toward the future, did something that would become the hallmark of 3M's culture. He didn't fire Drew for insubordination or wasting resources. He watched, he listened, and he gave the young man room to fail. When Drew finally showed up with a tape prototype that only had adhesive on the edges, a frustrated painter told him to take this tape back to your Scotch bosses and tell them to put more glue on it. In 1920s slang, Scotch was a derogatory term for someone stingy or cheap. Drew, in a stroke of marketing genius, took the insult and turned it into a brand. He perfected the adhesive, covering the entire strip with a precisely engineered balance of stick and release, and created Scotch masking tape. It was the first of its kind in the world. But Richard Drew was just getting started. He spotted another problem brewing. A new material called cellophane was becoming popular for wrapping food and consumer goods because it was transparent and moisture-proof. However, there was no attractive way to seal it. Glue looked messy and string was cumbersome. In 1930, Drew invented Scotch cellophane tape. It was a product born at the exact moment the Great Depression began to strangle the global economy. Most people thought a luxury item like transparent tape would fail in a world where people couldn't afford bread. They were wrong. Scotch tape became a sensation precisely because of the Depression. People didn't use it to wrap gifts. They used it to fix everything they couldn't afford to replace. They taped torn book pages, cracked window panes, broken toys, and even used it to seal canning jars. 3M had moved from the earth to the office, and the company's philosophy was shifting for good. McKnight realized that 3M's greatest asset wasn't its machines, its patents, or its minerals. It was the 15% of a man's time that he spent chasing an idea his boss hadn't authorized. That realization led to the formalization of the 15% rule, an official policy that let 3M scientists spend a portion of their work hours on projects of their own choosing, using company resources, without needing management approval. It was a radical, almost heretical departure from the rigid, top-down industrial management of the early 20th century. McKnight's logic ran deep. If you put fences around people, you get sheep. Give the people the room they need, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. That culture of permitted failure and structured autonomy would define the company's next 50 years. It led to the invention of reflective highway signage, which used millions of tiny glass beads to bounce light back at drivers, a technology that saved countless lives on America's dark rural roads. It led to the first waterproof sandpaper, known as Wetterdry, which let auto workers sand car bodies with water, eliminating the deadly clouds of silica dust that had plagued the industry for decades. As the world plunged into World War II, 3M's culture of innovation was put to the ultimate test. The company shifted almost overnight to support the war effort. They developed specialized tapes to seal ammunition crates, reflective materials to mark runways in the Pacific Theater, and even high-tech adhesives for aircraft assembly. The war rewired 3M's DNA, transforming it from a Midwestern manufacturer into a sophisticated chemical powerhouse. But it was in the post-war years, during the 1950s, that the company's accident-prone innovation reached new heights. In 1953, 2 lab chemists, Patsy Sherman and Samuel Smith, were working on a new type of fluorinated rubber intended for jet fuel hoses. It was a high-risk, high-temperature project. During a routine experiment, a beaker of the experimental liquid spilled onto a white canvas shoe. They tried everything to get it off. They used water, then strong solvents, then industrial soap. Nothing worked. But then Sherman noticed something extraordinary. The liquid hadn't just stayed on the shoe. It repelled everything they threw at it. Water beat it up and ran off. Oil couldn't penetrate the fibers. Instead of scolding whoever had spilled the liquid or tossing out the ruined shoe, 3M saw a billion-dollar opportunity. That accident became Scotchguard, the world's most famous fabric protector, a product that would eventually be found in nearly every home on the planet. However, as the 1960s drew to a close, 3M was hunting for its next big hit, a product that would define the company's next generation. In a lab in St. Paul, a senior chemist named Spencer Silver was trying to develop a super-strong adhesive for the aerospace industry. The goal was to find a glue that could replace rivets in airplanes, something that could withstand the incredible pressures of supersonic flight. Silver was working with a class of materials called acrylates, trying to make them bond with a strength that would never let go. But something went fundamentally wrong in the molecular structure of his batch. Instead of a solid, continuous film of glue, Silver accidentally created a substance made up of tiny microscopic spheres. These microspheres were incredibly resilient and durable, but they had a strange, seemingly useless property. They were tacky, but not sticky. They gripped a surface just enough to hold, but you could peel them off with the slightest tug, and they left absolutely no residue behind. Even stranger, you could stick and unstick them thousands of times without the adhesive ever losing its grip. To the aerospace engineers, this was a categorical failure. It was a glue that didn't glue. It was a mistake that should have gone straight down the drain. But Silver, steeped in 3M's culture of curiosity, couldn't let it go. He spent the next 5 years wandering through 3M's various departments, giving informal seminars on his non-sticky glue. He was a man with a solution in search of a problem. He pitched it to the tape division, to the office supplies division, and to the industrial division. Most people laughed. They called it a curiosity, a toy, or simply Silver's folly. It sat on a shelf for years, a testament to a failed experiment. Enter Arthur Fry. It's 1974, and Art Fry is a successful product development researcher at 3M. But his most important work happens on Sundays. Fry is a dedicated member of the choir at North Presbyterian Church in North St. Paul. He has a recurring, nagging problem. To keep track of the hymns for the morning service, he tucks small scraps of paper into his hymnal as bookmarks. But every time he stands up to sing, the scraps flutter to the floor, leaving him lost and flustered mid-performance. During a particularly long, dry sermon, Fry's mind drifted back to a seminar he'd attended months earlier. He remembered Spencer Silver and his oddball, non-sticky microspheres. A sudden, electrifying thought struck him. What if I could put that glue on the back of a piece of paper? It would stay in the book when I needed it, but I could move it whenever I wanted, without tearing the hymnal's delicate pages. The next day, Fry went to the lab and started tinkering under the protection of the 15% rule. He discovered that applying Silver's adhesive to paper was harder than it looked. The microspheres wanted to either sink into the paper or flake off in pieces. He had to develop a new primer to keep the glue on the paper instead of on whatever surface it was stuck to. As he worked, he started using the prototypes to write notes to his supervisor. He quickly realized the product's magic wasn't just in the sticking. It was in the re-sticking and the communication. It allowed a temporary, non-destructive layer of information to be placed over the physical world. He wasn't just making a bookmark, he was creating a new way for humans to interact with their environment. But 3M's marketing department was deeply skeptical. They ran traditional market research, and the results were lukewarm at best. People didn't know they needed a press and peel notepad until they had one in their hands. In 1977, the company launched the product in 4 test cities: Richmond, New York, Providence, and Denver, under that name. And it was a spectacular flop. The public looked at the yellow pads on store shelves and saw an expensive, unnecessary version of scratch paper. It was a failure of imagination. The product was nearly canceled, but 3M's leadership, led by men who had watched the failed mining company rise from its own ashes, didn't give up. They knew they had something revolutionary. They just didn't know how to close the gap between the product and the consumer's brain. In 1978, they settled on a scorched earth marketing tactic that has since become the stuff of business school legend, the Boise Blitz. They descended on Boise, Idaho, and handed out thousands upon thousands of free samples to every office, every secretary, every law firm, and every executive in the city. They didn't just leave them at the front desk, they made sure people actually started using them. The result was a revelation that stunned even 3M's optimists. The retention rate, the number of people who went out and bought the product after trying the free sample, was over 90%. It was the highest retention rate for a new product in the company's history. The people of Boise didn't just like the notes, they got hooked on them. Press and Peel was immediately rebranded as the Post-it Note. And the color? That iconic canary yellow wasn't the result of a $1 million focus group or a high-end design firm. According to the story 3M itself likes to tell, it was another happy accident. The lab next door to the Post-it development team happened to have a huge surplus of yellow scrap paper left over from another project. And that's simply what Fry and his team used for their first large-scale production run. By the time they considered other colors, yellow had already become synonymous with the product. In 1980, Post-it notes launched nationwide across the United States. Within 2 years, they'd become a billion-dollar product line, showing up on every desk from the Oval Office to the local elementary school. They changed the visual landscape of the modern office forever. They became the analog version of a pop-up notification, a way to annotate the physical world without leaving a permanent mark. 3M had successfully transitioned from a company that failed to mine the earth to a company that successfully mined the deep human need for organization and communication. But the Post-it note was just the most visible tip of a massive iceberg of innovation. While the world stuck yellow notes on its monitors, 3M was quietly moving into markets that would define the 21st century. In the 1980s and 90s, they leveraged their expertise in non-woven fabrics, a technology they'd originally developed for decorative ribbons and gift wrap, to create something far more critical. They realized that by blowing molten polymer through a high-speed airstream, they could create a web of microscopic fibers that were incredibly effective at filtering particles. That technology led to the development of Thinsulate, a lightweight insulation that revolutionized outdoor apparel, and eventually to the N95 respirator. The N95 wasn't just a mask, it was a high-tech filter that used electrostatic charges to trap viruses and bacteria. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit the world in 2020, 3M found itself at the center of a global storm. They ramped up production from 22 million masks a month to nearly 100 million, proving that their century-long commitment to unsexy industrial science was the literal difference between life and death for millions of people. Today, 3M is a stealth giant, a company that's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. While tech companies like Apple, Google, and Tesla capture the headlines in the public imagination, 3M is the invisible glue holding their products together. Literally. They develop the multi-layer optical films that make your smartphone screen bright and vivid while using 30% less battery. They created the specialized adhesives that hold battery packs together in electric vehicles. They made the stethoscopes that can transmit a heartbeat via Bluetooth from the International Space Station back to Earth. They even went back to their roots in the Earth, developing the advanced reflective materials that make every road sign and license plate in America visible at night. The company that started with 5 desperate men staring down a pile of useless rock in 2 harbors now holds more than 100,000 patents. They file an average of 3,000 new patents every year. That's a new invention every 3 hours, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's a pace of innovation that's almost impossible to grasp. But if you look closely at the 3M logo, you're not just looking at a manufacturing company. You're looking at a philosophy of permitted failure. You're looking at a company that realized, over a century of trial and error, that the most valuable thing a human being can do is make a mistake and then have the curiosity to ask, why? Walk into any office, any hospital, any construction site, or any lab on the planet today, and you'll never be more than 10 feet from a 3M product. But you probably won't see the logo. It's buried inside the walls as fire-retardant insulation. It's layered inside your laptop as a brightness-enhancing film. It's fused into the asphalt beneath your tires as a reflective polymer. The company that nearly died in 1902 because it couldn't tell the difference between corundum and anorthosite survived because it learned to value the wrong answer. It's a company built on the radical, counterintuitive idea that one chemist's failure is simply a marketer's opportunity waiting to happen. 3M didn't just change the office, it changed the way we think about the very nature of innovation. It proved you don't need a mountain of gold to build an empire. Sometimes all you need is a mountain of worthless rock, a bookkeeper with a plan, a choir singer with a problem, and a glue that simply won't stay stuck. If you've got a Post-it note on your monitor right now, or a roll of Scotch tape in your desk drawer, or a pair of Thinsulate gloves in your closet, take a moment to look at them. You're holding a piece of a century-long war against failure, a war that started in a failed mine on the shores of Lake Superior and ended up changing the way the world communicates and survives, one yellow square and one microscopic fiber at a time. The story of 3M is a reminder that, in the world of technology and business, the wrong mineral can lead to the right abrasive, the wrong glue can lead to the right note, and the failed company can end up building the future. Subscribe and like if you want to see more stories about the unlikely companies and accidental geniuses who built our world from the ground up. Tell us in the comments, what's the most useful accident you've ever had? What was your own failed project that turned into something else? Because at 3M, that accident might just be worth $1 billion. Thanks for watching American Electronics and Tech. See you on the next circuit board and the next story of human ingenuity.